Christopher Armitage, candidate in Washington's 5th District. Welcome to the studio.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here.
Having me, John.
We appreciate you coming out. Now we've talked previously, but it's been a little bit, so we're gonna give people an update on how the race is going. We're gonna talk a little bit about your opponent, but for people who might not be familiar with you, I wanted them to get an idea of who you are, what your background is going into this race.
Yeah, I have a pretty unique background compared to most progressives. So I served 2 enlistments at the Fairchild Air Force Base, the base in our district. I was security forces. I did law enforcement and 911 operator work when I was stateside. Deployed to the Middle East twice, where I did security on the Iraq-Kuwait border and was on the Oman Emirates border as a base defense operations controller. While I was active duty, I earned an undergrad in criminal justice and a master's in homeland security. And then I got out of the Air Force and was pretty done with all that and spent most of the last 2 years as a professional stand-up comic. And now here I am.
That's a switch. Okay,
Yeah.
That's interesting. So tell me a little bit about running with your background in the armed forces.
Air Force, yeah.
In the Air Force, yeah. So like traditionally that is thought of as, well, if you're gonna be running for office, having a background in the military is certainly helpful, especially if you're in an area that might be a little bit more on the conservative side. Have you found that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It just gives the the things I believe a little bit more weight. When I talk about how once elected, I want to push to be appointed to the House Homeland Security Committee and make climate change the top priority on the House Homeland Security Committee. Carries a little more weight since that's what I studied. I spent years studying terrorism in school and actually going to the Middle East and going firsthand there. So the same with my law enforcement experience. When I say we should decriminalize all drugs, it carries that extra weight because I've been there and I've seen it myself. And so that background really isn't what a lot of people are expecting, and it just the things I believe carry extra.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that firsthand experience. So you served, you said, the Iraq-Kuwait border.
Yeah.
So let's say you make it into the House, and maybe we'll be lucky enough to have a Democratic president. Maybe you'll be in the House and it'll still be Donald Trump. And someone starts beating the drums of war for Iran, or there's an escalation of our involvement in the war in Yemen. What is your background, your experience? What do you think that will bring to you, to your either advocacy, to what you're advocating for in terms of policy?
Yeah, well, even earlier today, I actually got to meet with some folks from Code Pink, and so I made their pledge to divest from, not accept any money from the war machine or the military-industrial complex. I think one of the most important things we could do to make sure that we're not getting involved in future genocides and coups is to meet the standards of the International Criminal Court. Now, right now, they disproportionately penalize people from Africa. Meanwhile, most of the industrialized world just doesn't face consequences for overthrowing democratically elected leaders, giving bombs and guns and tanks and planes to countries that are committing genocide. And we've been fed this myth for so long that capitalism spreads democracy and spreads freedom, and we continue to see that that's not true. So, in Congress, making sure that there's no profit incentive to being at war constantly. There's no way for defense contractors to make money off of that, for politicians to make money off of that. Getting those upstream causes is absolutely one of my top priorities.
Yeah. And another of your top priorities you mentioned was climate change, which I'm always glad to see someone at the congressional level that's making that sort of a front and center part of their candidacy. What would you like to see done in that area?
Well, I'm a supporter of the Green New Deal. I'm a member of the Sunrise Movement. It's the group I'm the most proud to be a part of, probably. And so, the Green New Deal, the resolution that it sets is, to me, one of the greatest pieces of legislation ever proposed. The idea that you're going to say, even if you don't believe in the science, here's a jobs program, here's a living wage, here's all these things that people, in our district, we have areas that have 30% poverty rate. In some of our counties, 3 times the national average. We have areas with over 10% unemployment. That doesn't even include the people who are underemployed or people who've been unemployed for a long time. The Green New Deal is going to do so much for this country. It would, particularly in our district, in those rural areas where people are just, they need jobs, they need health care, they need opportunities, and why not wrap it up in opportunities, making the world safer and cleaner?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the race. The current incumbent is Republican Kathy McMorris Rodgers. And so I was looking at your district and the state. So your district over the past like 4 or 5 presidential elections has trended more Republican with each election. There were 5 counties that had voted both times for Obama and then switched over to Trump. So with that sort of district, how is that influencing the way that you're campaigning?
Well, so a lot of how I talk to people about this race goes back to the last Democrat to hold this seat, Tom Foley. He was Speaker of the House and he lost his seat in 1994. He was first elected in 1964, and the way that he won those rural counties was because he went to them. He spent as much time there as in the more metropolitan areas. You know, people could say, Tom is my friend. Even if they disagreed with him on policies, they knew that he had good character. They could see him out on the street, they could see him at the grocery store. And you know, I've realized the more we get out there that a grassroots working class progressive has more in common with a Trump Republican that's working class than an establishment, elitist, corporate-funded Democrat will ever have with the 99%. And we continue to see that. There's at least one person who has my bumper sticker next to a Trump bumper sticker. If he wants to, you know, if that's how he wants to vote, with me and Trump on the same ballot, when I told him up front exactly how I support single-payer Medicare for all, K through 16 tuition-free, if he still wants to do that, I appreciate that I'll have his vote.
So what was his response?
Well,
because a lot of these policies that you support, presumably Trump does not.
He was there for a really interesting reason. Now, first of all, he said he supports Trump because he's no BS, was the exact term, and that he's not a politician. And so I think that the more we get out there, the more I'm learning. People just care that they're not voting for more of the same. You know, they look at the government as a monolith. They see people, you know, they don't care what your record looks like. If you've been part of the machine for 30 years that's been disenfranchising them and making their lives harder, they're not gonna be happy with you. They're not gonna vote for you. And so these people, you know, working class people, for the most part in our district, they don't care about whether it's multi-payer or single payer, you know. And when I mentioned to him too, you know, I had a commander who once told me the best answer is the right answer, the second best answer is the wrong answer, and the worst answer is no answer. And right now, nobody's bringing answers to the table. You know, he responded to that. But you know, it's not my job when I talk to him to pitch him on the presidential race either. My job is to get out there, talk to people, hear their stories. He had a really unfortunate situation where his 21-year-old son died from completely preventable cancer.
Oh, wow. And
they had to run a genetic test. They wouldn't run it until he was showing symptoms, and by then he was gone within 6 months. So, you know, I guess he's just looking for the integrity candidate. He's looking for the candidate who he believes in their judgment. And most people have never met someone running for Congress. And one of our goals is to make me the most accessible person in Congress. You know.
So let's talk a little bit about your transition from in the military, stand-up comic, but then running for office. So you volunteered for the 2018 challenger to McMorris Rodgers?
Yes, I did. I hosted a fundraiser for her and did want her to win. You know.
What do you think that you learned from that experience? Not just, you know, volunteering on a congressional campaign, but volunteering on a campaign that just a couple of years later you would be running for.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing was that I think people can smell out when you don't want to say where you stand on the issues, and that's kind of how I felt. I think a lot of people have seen that in a lot of different races. They can tell when you don't want to say how you really feel about a particular policy and you're dancing around it, and you're not going to win any votes that way. And so I got to meet folks who worked so hard because they care about the cause. They were giving night and day. Their whole life was dedicated to trying to flip the seat. But I also knew a lot of those people felt betrayed because they couldn't get a commitment from the candidate for single payer, which I think the more research you do, the more you see that it's actually the most efficient system if you want to get rid of the bureaucracy and get rid of all the extra steps. You know, they couldn't get commitments on a lot of different policies, and people'd rather vote for someone they disagree with who's honest than someone who won't tell you where they stand.
So let's turn now to the one that they have been voting for in the past few elections. So she's been in office for a number of years now. You were saying that some of the voters who support you and Trump, they like someone who's not just an insider politician who just says what they think you want to hear. What do they see when they see Cathy McMorris Rodgers? Do they see her as that establishment, you know, inside DC person?
They see her, I mean, amazingly, I think that she's just good at flying under the radar. The voters who vote for her, They just see the R next to her name. They've never met her. They've never spoken to her. She comes in, and when there's a parade, she's known for coming in and getting a photo op on the float before the parade starts and then going home.
That sounds fun.
And you know, people are ready for that change. So many of these communities have just never been visited ever. Yeah. And you know, right now she's actually Trump's Washington fundraising chair. So you know, a good reason for people to help contribute to the campaign is because they consider our district a stronghold. It's +9 red right now, but we know we can change that. You know, we were fortunate enough to really have some folks look at this race and break it down. And when you do, in the past 25 years that this has been you know, a Republican district predominantly, we haven't run a single veteran. We haven't run anyone under the age of 50. We haven't run anyone with a background in national security. And so, you know, it's hard to say that you're a changing of the guard when you kind of look the same as everybody else who's run.
Yeah, and I mean, you point out it's +9, but we've seen bigger swings than that in the midterms in 2018. And it's been trending more conservative, but it wasn't that long ago that it was voting for Democrats. So it's certainly not impossible that could happen again. One last thing, because I like to do research both on the candidate I'm interviewing, but also who they're running against. And the most recent news for Kathy McMorris Rodgers was the result of an ethics panel investigation that showed that she had misused campaign funds, that she had had sloppy bookkeeping for a number of years. Is that penetrating at all in the district, or does that seem very removed from people's lives?
The only way we're going to break through the Fox News bubble is by shaking people's hands, getting to know them. I actually ran into one of the people on her fundraising committee not too long ago, and just complete happenstance, and we ended up having a nice conversation. She went into it and thought she wasn't going to like me because I'm a Democrat, and we were able to find where the Venn diagrams overlap. I talked to a lot of people about that, and so that news isn't getting through, but that's not what's going to get through. What's going to get through is Conversations, is volunteers, is connections. That's how Tom Foley did it. That's the the last person who it worked for in our district, to the point where he became the Speaker of the House. And how poetic is it going to be when our current representative, who they're so sure is in a strong position in that district, she doesn't even show up. She's Trump's Washington fundraising chair.
Yeah.
And almost 20 years later, she loses her seat.
Yeah.
We can do it. ArmitageForCongress.com.
I was actually just going to say, for donations and volunteers, looks like you got the website there with some specific sections there. Well, Christopher, we appreciate you coming out and talking with us.
Thank you.
Good luck with the race.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.